Alright, good evening. I'm Dan, and a little bit different tonight. I'm going to build off of a previous video that was done by Randy Richards in the shop, where he did an excellent review of a HV-4 Hardinge Indexer. This is going to be just a quick couple of points on an HV-0, which is a very close cousin of that one, but I wanted to point out a couple of things, and it's been sitting around waiting for attention for a long time, but I'll get into it and make a quick video on it. Alright, a key piece on this one before you get too crazy with doing anything on the teardown is right here. This index mark, bring you in just a little closer. That index mark is set to 0. What that means is inside the keyway is lined up with the hole in the casing. So if you don't have that lined up and you start to disassemble this thing, you're going to chowder this. Okay, let's try that again. Battery went dead on the previous one. Just as we talked about earlier, the 0 here on the spindle needs to be locked in. If that's in, then the keyway that we were playing with earlier is going to be directly lined up in the casing. And to prove that is, you notice, set to 0 before removing the spindle. So Hardinge put that out in clear lettering. However, a lot of that has been rubbed out over time and the ages. So I just happen to have one here that has clear lettering on it. And the one in my unit here is still pretty good, but it's kind of cryptic. It doesn't, not exactly sure what it means until you start working on this one. So heads up for anybody who is working on that, go from there. And you also notice that the one screw is backed out here compared to all the rest, and that is the one I've got it locked in on 0. So now you'd be safe to remove the spindle, keeping an index. Now what I would do in addition to all of that is to go ahead and make yourself a mark on the front where it says key, and make another corresponding mark. So as you're removing this thing, it requires a little bit of tapping. You want to go ahead and make sure that's still lined up so you're not going to crater your case. It's not going to destroy it, but it's certainly going to do it any good. I think that's partly what happened with this one when they took it apart and they banged around on it. But be that as it may, that's what we got. This was washed several hours ago. My wife's going to make fun of my southern English. Washed for those of you from the northern climes. And you'll notice that these components, even though they were soaking wet a little while ago, show no signs of any rust setting up in this somewhat dry but still damp basement after being washed and scrubbed clean in soap and water. So I'm just pulling the pieces out here to lay this out. I'll get to the business end of the discussion here in a few minutes. Randy's video is the quintessential version. This is just a couple of updates from my version, which they are extremely close to being exactly identical, but I believe mine is far older. There's just a 5C collet. And this is one of the tricks that I used since I was washing this down. This is a strainer from one of those fancy travel mugs for tea, and I put all the nuts and bolts inside of there because it's fine mesh, and I was able to wash it all out. There goes the word again, wash. And you'll notice that I didn't lose anything and everything was pretty well cleaned out. And when it was done being rinsed, there you go, I found a couple of things. This is one of the retaining bolts for the shooting with two cameras here, so you get it edited out. One of the two clamp bolts that go for this assembly here, and it looks like they made their own as opposed to having the real one. In this case, this one is likewise turned off, so I think they actually had them and then turned it off so they could actually fit it down there and it would act like a pin as opposed to actually being a bolt. Okay, and this wood is actually working out very nice. These grooves are in here and they're keeping it from parts from rolling around. Okay, not sure anything things like that. I'm shooting at two different angles here so you can kind of see what I'm looking at. There's another interesting component. Hard for you to see, and yeah, I'm wearing gloves. I work in an office, and you know. That's actually for the ratchet mechanism. I'm going to put that over here where it's caged. A couple other screws. And here is one of the pieces I wanted to show you. This came to me non-functioning, which many things do. Henceforth the House of Broken Doves things. And you'll notice, it'll focus well, that is a half-moon key. And one end is kind of chunky. Hopefully that'll focus out. We'll try it on two different cameras so you can see it up close. One side is kind of chewed up. And the way these things work, there is a 5C collet. I'm just going to mock this up real quick. That you lock the 5C collet inside the housing. The collet sits on this side, right here. And this provides a measured rotating assembly in whatever selection you've made. You're limited by the number of slots. For every one of those circles, that's an indexing position. This is a 20 tooth. I got to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And a 20 tooth. So what happens is the screws are set down inside, and you thread them or unthread them. You thread them in where they're flush, and that will not give you an index at that position, but you back them out, and that will leave a hole. And from the hole aspect of it, this is the indexing pin that as you rotate, it will drop into that hole and lock the entire assembly. So, very accurate, very, very slick setup. You are limited, again, by the number of holes that you have, so whatever can go into 20 is what you're going to get. There are 24s. We're going to try to see about that sometime to see if we can make that happen. Gives you a little bit more flexibility, but obviously in 20 you can get 2, you can get 4, you can get 5, and from there you can get 10. That's pretty much where you're going to be as far as this one. But you can go with odd spacings. You know, you've got 20 locations, you can go with something different. However, what is interesting is this assembly did not turn when it showed up. And it looked in really good condition. The clutch mechanism worked. The 5C lock wasn't locked in position, and everything looked really good. I'm like, what's wrong with this thing? There's not much that can go on. Occasionally you can get the pin isn't adjusted and it won't turn, as Randy outlined in his. It wouldn't lock in tight in his situation, but in my case it wouldn't release maybe. I'm like, oh, okay, so I removed all that. That didn't seem to be it. However, as I was working on this, and this is a very precision assembly as this goes in, fits very, very tight, very professionally ground and all that wonderful stuff to maintain its indexing efficiency, and it wouldn't turn. So as I loosened this lock nut, and I'll show you more about that in a little bit, as I loosen the lock nut, that allows this entire assembly to loosen, and it comes out this side. Okay, so it sits in like this, and this tightens it down, that pulls it in. There is a thrust washer right here on the end. It's hard to see, and with the fluid film it gets a little tacky, so there we go. There is a precision ground thrust washer that this sits inside the housing and provides it its thrust surface, and this ring here provides the load. And there's a little bitty locking cog that Randy outlined in his very closely, but you'll see it has little bitty teeth on it. I apologize for the focus. And those lock into the teeth on the outside of this ring. Very positive lock. Alright, so this assembly, even though it was loosened, it wasn't turning. Well, There's really not a lot of scalding marks or anything on there. Yeah, it's been dry, and yeah, it's had some water in it, I would estimate. But there's really no gouges or anything significant in there to stop it. So that made me look a little further, which it always have to. And I'm going to move the camera here. Give you a little bit of a view of this. Okay, if you'll notice, I'll borrow this pointer. Right here looks to be conspicuous. Okay, what is that all about? The rest of it, perfectly smooth. Looks great. What is causing that? Oh, sorry for the camera shuffle here. I'm going to show it to you up close. This half moon key I showed you earlier that had the little bit of hijinks, when this assembly was being pulled down tight, the half moon key rides right here, which, a little bit of a snug fit here, it grabs on the inside of the index ring. You see the keyway there, and it rides like this on that half moon key, which locks this ring to the index, to the shaft, to the 5C collet that you have tucked in there, and it basically gives you your indexing. So everything is riding on this half moon key. Well, when I looked at it closely, it's chowdered. You can see that on the tip. What it appears to be is that Bubba, or his other brother, Jerry Joe Jim Bob Don, put the wrong key in this one at one juncture or the other, and that caused this thing to lock up. And I'm like the first dummy afterwards to even take a look. So what was happening is okay. If you look right here, the camera out of the light, or let me use a little bit more light. The spot that it had, I would say that it was getting caught as soon as you were tightening down the thrust ring with this thrust ring nut that was pushing the ring assembly back, and because this thing didn't have enough room, as soon as it was pulling tight on one side, it was actually pulling that half moon key into contact with the housing, therefore locking it. So my theory and my hypothesis at this juncture is that key was gouging into there because it is the improper half moon key, and therefore it was causing this thing to lock up. There's not a lot to this thing, so I believe it was locking up because of an improper half moon key that was installed, and they tightened it up, it seized up. They were probably a production environment and they couldn't spend any more time on it. But if you look at it, there's no reason in the world those chowder marks should be there. And I'm speaking right here. Something was gouged into that, and there is no way anything can get inside of this thing to do that. My theory is it was the key being pushed in whenever everything's tightened up. If you look at that really closely, how it's gouged and rolled over. I'd say it gouged in here and pushed in tight, locked into position, and they said, oh, forget it. They moved on. So that's my theory. I think it will pan out. That's probably going to work. And this thing is absolutely nothing else I can find wrong with it. Everything is ready. Everything's ready to go. So we are going to take a little touch up on that one, and we're going to play with that half moon key just a little bit, and then we're going to assemble this thing and see what happens. All right, we'll bring you back. Okay, we went out in the shop and cleaned up that half moon key a little bit. There's very little fluid film on it. You can see, got rid of that edge. And now it has a little bit of clearance, and hopefully it shouldn't be digging in to this housing. We'll just do a quick fit here. Okay. Make sure that we put the thrust washer on there again. Dummy. I did this time. I'm usually far more capable of not doing it. And it is lead hammer. Don't anybody get excited. Just a little one I picked up in an eBay lot one day. I believe we don't have enough clearance yet. This edge is getting caught in the keyway as it comes around. So, to borrow some logic here, going to take this, yeah, I know, just a light tap job here, folks. Okay. Anybody gets excited, here's my brass drift. I think we got a resounding smack there. Let's see if that does us any good before we have to go and maybe adjust the size a little bit more. Negative. I'll turn this around a little bit. If you can see that right there, it's catching right here, right in that spot right there, which is where the keyway comes through. Right there. Alright, we're going to go massage that just a little bit, and we're going to bring you right back. Okay, we gave that a little bit of a haircut. See if I can get the lighting in there. Point out, you can see the keyway. You see the casting around the edge. Previously, before I touched that up, it was actually hooking into the actual keyway right here, getting caught. And when it wasn't lined up like that, and then they tightened this up as they probably tried to get it to work, they were taking the nut and it was jamming this keyway right into there. I'm considerably shorter now, but the width of this is pretty much going to take care of the indexing ring, and there's not a tremendous amount of force on this thing. It's just holding position, but I think we're going to be okay. We're going to go ahead and get this thing together. Alright, so I've got the housing in, and we are going to start to put things together. Let me slip on a fresh pair of gloves because this fluid film is wonderful, but man, can it get slimy if you don't keep your hands clean, and then you start slipping, and you know. Alright, I'll bring you right back. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and use the fluid film on this. The reason for that is this isn't under a lot of stress or strain. This stuff never dries out. It doesn't draw moisture. It won't freeze. So other than being a miracle chemical, it actually has a little bit of lubricity to it. Now, will this thing get used a ton? No. No, not much at all. But we want it to be rust proof in the interim while it sits on the shelf. So now this ring is tight to this housing, so we'll move the fluid film out of the way so you can see. Go over a little closer. Okay, so with that, this is the indexing side of the ring, so you can keep track of that. Here is this little spring-loaded pin. You can see that right there. That pin right there is spring-loaded, and it goes and rides on the back of this housing. See the little index marks right there? So as this goes around and you're cranking it, that's providing a indexing to hold the position of where you have the 5C collet tension. You kind of hear a rough version of it there. Okay, so that's what it's there for. It's got a good spring action. I didn't take it out. I didn't want to borrow trouble, so we'll go from there. You ever heard that expression, borrow trouble? Typically, it was on the, I was working in the mechanic business a long time ago. Taking off things that didn't need to be taken off was kind of known as borrowing trouble. So some bolt was going to break or something, and I'm sure there's lots of other guys that worked in the car repair business that would probably echo it if you don't need to. Alright, so I am lining up this ring right now, or attempting to do so, with a keyway. Now, as Randy noted in his video, he called it out very, very nicely. This is a very, very, very good fit. So, once it's lined up, you've got to tap it a little bit. It's going to take a little bit to get it in there. Okay, I'm just absolutely making sure that I have it lined up before I do anything stupid, as I'm known to do from time to time. Yeah, that appears to be off by ever so small. We can negotiate now. Okay, just a real quick one to go back over it. I don't think I shot a very good angle as I was going through editing. this spot right here is where that little toothed input locker sits right here. So this is knurled around the outside edge with a straight knurl, and that slides right down inside, and there's the single screw which retains it. So once you get your thrust set up the way you want it, because it's going to be a little bit of personal feel, how tight you want this to be, and you take out the end play, and then you can go a little further, a little lighter, depends on what you want to do. And then you line this up, tap it back and forth just a little bit, and then you line that up. Alright, and going through this, these are the screws that you back out. In other words, in the case of this one, looking around, when they're threaded in, that's not an index point. When they're threaded out, that is an index point. So in the case of this one, there's going to be two spots where it's going to stop. And these do stop as you turn them in. They do bottom out. And as Randy noted in his video, they are a very special screw. Alright, so this one's going to bottom. And then that's not going to index any further, but the one that I've got where it's set to 0, that's going to index. So just a couple clarifying points on it, so you understand what I'm talking about if I reference it again. A little bit of goo we've left in there. Actually, I think it's just solidifying some of the stuff that we washed out. Okay, the adjusting arm, or the 5C collet adjuster, it's pretty straightforward. We talked about that one. And we didn't talk about the fork. I'm going to call it a fork because it's basically you lock it in and lock it out, the 5C collet. It sets in this position right here, it locks into the case, and you either pull it forward or you pull it backward. It's going to unlock and lock your 5C collet. And again, these are a production tool. This is a professional deal. And consequently, you're recycling these things hundreds and or thousands of times a day. Alright, so just another little piece of input. Okay, I'm going to finish this one up. We've got the housing assembly back together. We have the indexing, activate, deactivate. And this sits down inside. It's a gear and rack assembly. So we get it timed just right. Activate this, and then you activate the ratchet, and then you make your rotation. It rotates until it hits the catch for the unit that you want to pop. There you go. If you lock that, if you watch this lever again, rotate. Screws backed out. You can see it quiver. Yeah, it tried to. Alright, let's adjust one out here. Set up the index. Again, backing out is where the index is going to be. That's going to allow that pin to drop in that slot. Okay, and we've got that one. Boom. Alright, so we'll bring it off of that one, set up another one. Very, very finely machined. Alright, bring it around. Pops right in. And once it's in, it's not going anywhere. This clutch mechanism needs a little love. I don't know whether the spring is just giving it up or the time and wear. As you can see, that locked in, it's going nowhere. Or the little pawl needs to be freshened up. Okay, we talked earlier about the 5C. This is the 5C that's going to go in, slides right through. Mechanism there, it's just going to turn and lock in. 5C comes in the other side, and you're going to thread it. Line it up. And it has a standard 5C indexing. See, see, pulling it into position, and it's a little bit of by gosh, by gum on the location of it, how tight you're going to get it. And once you get that set, then the I'm going to call it a fork for lack of a better term. This is going to come into play, and then there is a short one. Again, this breaks down pretty fast. If you have it lined up. Okay. One in the top, one in the bottom. You can see why I put that wood down early on. From that, unlock and lock, unlock and then lock. I'll pull that in a little tighter, maybe it'll be a little easier to see. Lock, unlock, lock, unlock. Closer. The intention is to have your part in here, basically push it forward to get it set, and then you lock it, do your operation, pull the pin, go to the next location, lock it in, pull your part, whatever you need to do. Okay, sorry this went on a little bit longer, but I tried to include some humor in the video editing to point out my own shortcomings. Great component, very well built. You can see that it's pretty darn close to the one that Randy Richard has in his shop, but a little bit older. Again, this clutch, it works pretty good. It's only one direction. There you go. See it drop right in. Again, it catches every once in a while. It needs a little bit of look. But other than that, on the bottom of the tool itself, you've got a place to set up your keys so you can line it up on your machine tool and adjust it in, zero it out. And that's really about all I had to do. So I appreciate you spending time with me and looking this one over. It's a great tool. Again, I've had it around for a long time, just getting to it, but I wanted to show off the tool, and you can see that a lot of these out there in the world have been boogered and repaired. Tons and tons of them on eBay you'll see that don't even have the clutch. So if you don't have the clutch, you're not dead in the water, but it certainly is a lot nicer if you're doing a lot of components. Drops right in. Okay, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed it. This is Dan. See ya.